Hi, I'm Elise, this is Witchway, and in this video I'll be taking you through the witch lore of Witchfinder General. Released in 1968, this horror film stars Vincent Price as Matthew Hopkins, Ian Ogilvy as Richard Marshall, Hilary Heath as Sarah Lowes, Robert Russell as John Stern, and Rupert Davies as John Lowes. It's 1645 and the people in Brandiston have called in Matthew Hopkins, Witchfinder General, as they suspect their priest, John Lowes, to be an idolater and witch. With his assistant, John Stern, Matthew Hopkins apprehends the priest. In the hopes to spare him, the priest's niece, Sarah, tries to stall the men from carrying out the punishment. It doesn't last long and her uncle is hanged as a witch. Sarah's betrothed, the soldier Richard Marshall, returns to find Sarah outcast by the town. He vows to avenge her and her uncle and track down those responsible, but he and Sarah may too fall prey to the accusations of witchcraft. Matthew Hopkins and John Stern were indeed in the business of witch-finding from 1644 to 1647, Matthew Hopkins giving himself the title Witchfinder General, and the two of them over this period were responsible for the hanging of over 100 accused witches, and both wrote about their times as witchfinders. Hopkins in his The Discovery of Witches, and Stern in his A Confirmation and Discovery of Witchcraft. It's here that we hear about some of their victims and the methods used of identifying witches that we see in the film, starting with the priest, John Lowe. John Lowe was aged 80 years old, and after these accusations, he was indeed tested for the devil's mark.
What purpose is this?
When the devil buys a soul, he marks the person's flesh, so we will know him. If such a mark is pricked, no blood will flow, nor pain be felt.
This mark was said to be where witches would feed their familiars, and this mark, when pricked, would not bleed and the witch would feel no pain. Hence, the method used by Hopkins and Stern of using a bodkin to insert into the mark to see if it would bleed. This gave the witchfinders the fitting name of witch prickers. Next, John Lowe is run around. Though this only happens for a few moments in the film, Lowe's was actually run about in his cell for several nights in a method known as waking the witch, a form of torture used by Hopkins and Stern to force a confession from the accused. Lowe's was then swum in the river. This method was made popular by King James's demonology, as it was said that witches rejected the water of their baptism and so the water would reject them. You can see them being tied in a particular method in the film, one which we do see demonstrated in woodcuts depicting witches being swum. If they floated, they were guilty, and if they sunk, innocent, though as we see in the film, they weren't always pulled out in time. Finally, after being found guilty, Lowes was hanged for witchcraft. A commemorative plaque now stands to John Lowe, stating that before he was hanged, he read his own funeral rites to ensure that he had a proper burial. We see him hanged alongside others, but not as many who were actually executed that day. 18 people were actually sent to the gallows in a single day thanks to the intervention of Hopkins and Stern. In the film, they then head down to Levenham, where Hopkins turns his sights to his next victim, Elizabeth Clark. Clark was apparently actually the first victim of Matthew Hopkins, who stated that he saw familiars attend to the 80-year-old woman while he kept watch. Familiars being imps in animal form and were said to attend witches. An illustration from his The Discovery of Witches depicts this event, where Elizabeth Clark and Rebecca West name their familiars after two being subjected to torture. These familiars have such strange names, such as Vinegar Tom, Mauser, and Pyewacket, almost comical if it wasn't for the circumstances. She too was hanged as a witch, not burned as we see in the film, which was most likely inspired by images we see of accused witches or even heretics being burned by being tied to a ladder and lowered onto a pyre. All of Hopkins' victims were hanged, as this was the punishment in England for the crime of witchcraft. However, there was one trial where Hopkins was consulted informally that did see an accused witch burn. Known as the Ipswich Witch, Mary Lackland was tried for witchcraft, though it was another charge that saw her burned: petty treason for the alleged murder of her husband. This film scores for lore and history. I liked the fact that it portrayed these figures as the monsters they were, sending people to the gallows for a bit of cash. It didn't show any truths behind these witchcraft allegations, and the film saw a fitting end for these witch pricks. The real-world Hopkins retired from witch-finding and died at his home not long after, at the young age of 27. This was another great recommendation from the comments. If you have your own witchy recommendations for my upcoming witch lore reviews, please leave them in the comments below, as well as giving this video a like. Please remember to subscribe to this channel, it really helps me out. And as always, thank you very much for watching here on Witch Way.